Hello, and welcome back to this quiet corner of the universe. Tonight, our journey takes us to a place of silent majesty, where geometric titans touch a sky filled with the dust of forgotten millennia. Imagine the cool night air of the desert, the celestial river of the Milky Way, arching over three dark pyramids, perfect in their form, eternal in their patience. They have watched civilizations rise and fall, languages born and turn to whispers. The story we know of them is a great one, but the sands of time are deeper than any book, and they hold secrets in their countless grains. Tonight, let us wonder together about a story that is rarely told. It's hard to imagine a world where these structures are not the work of dynastic Egypt, but something other, something impossibly older. If you find this journey suits you, a like or subscribe helps this small signal find other curious minds. There is, of course, no pressure at all. I'm always curious to know where on this planet you are listening from and what time it is in your part of the world. It's a wonderful thought that we, separated by space and time, can share this moment together. Now, find a comfortable position and let your mind slow to the rhythm of time. Our journey begins. The story, as we are told it, is etched not just in stone, but in the very foundations of our historical understanding. On a limestone plateau, overlooking the fertile ribbon of the Nile, the pharaohs of the 4th dynasty of Egypt's Old Kingdom commanded the creation of monuments so grand they would echo through eternity. Around 4,500 years ago, during the reigns of Khufu, Khafra, and Menkaure, a civilization at the peak of its power organized a society-wide effort to build stairways to the stars for their divine kings. This is the anchor point of archaeology, the bedrock of Egyptology. We can almost hear the sounds from that distant era: the scrape of copper tools on limestone, the murmur of thousands of skilled laborers in their nearby village, the shouts of overseers coordinating the arrival of granite barges from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. This established timeline is built on a network of evidence, radiocarbon dating of mortar and organic materials found within the stones, the discovery of the workers' settlement, and the intricate context of the surrounding necropolis, filled with the tombs of nobles and officials who served these very pharaohs. It all weaves together into a coherent and compelling narrative of human ingenuity and royal ambition. For generations, this story has been enough. It is, in itself, a wonder. The achievement of building the Great Pyramid in a span of perhaps 20 years is a testament to a level of planning and resource management that is difficult to comprehend even today. And yet, in the heart of this magnificent certainty, there are quiet spaces. Mysteries that linger like the cool air in a long-sealed chamber. If we venture inside the Great Pyramid, up the Grand Gallery, and into the King's Chamber, we find ourselves in a room of breathtaking precision, built from monolithic blocks of red granite. But here, there are no triumphant hieroglyphs declaring the name of Khufu. There are no carvings detailing the pyramid's construction, no prayers to the gods to protect the king on his journey to the afterlife. The walls are bare. They are silent. The evidence that ties Khufu to this monument is contextual and in some cases indirect. The most definitive proof comes from small, inaccessible, relieving chambers above, where quarry marks were found, painted on the stone, naming the work gangs. The Friends of Khufu Gang. These were never meant to be seen. The great histories written by the Greek scholar Herodotus, thousands of years after the pyramid's supposed construction, also tell the story of the king who built it. But the monument itself does not speak his name in its sacred public spaces. This silence has always been a point of quiet curiosity for scholars. Why build the single greatest structure on Earth and leave its central chamber so unadorned, so anonymous? From this small, quiet question, others begin to grow. The enduring mystery of the construction itself remains a subject of intense academic debate. How did a civilization, officially in the Bronze Age, quarry, lift, and place, with millimeter accuracy, granite blocks weighing as much as 80 tons? Scholars have proposed countless ingenious methods involving ramps, straight, spiral, or internal, and all are theoretically plausible. But no one is certain. The truth is, we do not definitively know how it was done. We only know that it was. It is from these quiet uncertainties that our journey tonight truly begins. We are going to gently set aside the established narrative, not to dismiss it, but to place it on a shelf for a short while. In its place, we will entertain a thought experiment, a question that shifts our perspective from the scale of human history to the scale of geological time. What if the pyramids are not 4,500 years old, but many, many times older? What if the great pharaohs were not their builders, but their inheritors? What if they discovered these silent ancient structures already standing on the plateau, already weathered by unimaginable ages, and in awe built their own civilization around them, claiming them as their own? What if the pyramids are echoes of a chapter in the human story that has been completely erased? A chapter that ended long before the first king of Egypt was ever born. Let us imagine this possibility, and in our minds, travel back, not just past the pharaohs, past the invention of writing, past the dawn of farming, but back into the deep time before the world was reshaped by the last great ice age. Our minds drift backwards, like a vessel set loose on a river of time, flowing not downstream to the future, but upstream into the deep past. We leave the familiar shorelines of recorded history behind. The Roman Empire dissolves into mist, then the philosophical groves of Greece. And further still, the very first cities of Mesopotamia fade from view. We are traveling now into an age imagined only through the patient work of geology and paleontology, a time measured in the slow pulse of ice, advancing and retreating. We are entering the world of the late Pleistocene. This era, stretching from roughly 130,000 years ago to the cusp of our own time, is often called the Ice Age. But that name is a simplification, a single word for a long and complex story of profound climatic shifts. For much of this period, the world was not uniformly frozen. It was a dynamic planet of immense forests, sprawling grasslands, and ecosystems of a richness we can barely conceive of today. It was a world in a different state of being, breathing to a slower, deeper rhythm. One of the most significant differences was the distribution of the world's water. So much of it was locked away in colossal ice sheets, not only at the poles, but on the northern continents, that the sea levels were dramatically lower. By our modern standards, the coastlines of this ancient world would be almost unrecognizable. Great Britain was not an island, but a northern peninsula of Europe, connected by a vast and fertile plain now lost beneath the North Sea. From the eastern edge of Siberia, a wide land bridge, Beringia, stretched across to Alaska, creating a highway for life between Asia and the Americas. The islands of Indonesia were part of a single larger landmass called Sunda. It was a more connected world, a world with fewer barriers to the slow migrations of animals, and perhaps of people. Across the great northern continents of Eurasia and North America, a unique biome reigned, one that no longer exists on Earth. They call it the Mammoth Steppe. It was not a dense forest, nor a barren tundra, but a vast, cold and dry grassland, a sea of hardy vegetation that supported an almost unbelievable density of life. The very air of this world was different, holding slightly more oxygen, which some scientists speculate may have been a factor in allowing life to grow to such immense sizes. And the world itself was oriented differently. The planet's magnetic north, that invisible point that our compasses seek, was not where it is today. It wandered as it always does. And during this period, it was located further south, over what is now northern Canada, changing the very geometry of the heavens for any creature that looked to the sky or the Earth's subtle forces for navigation. A civilization in this time would have oriented their world, their sacred spaces, and their understanding of the cosmos to a different pole star, a different map of unseen energies. And into this world of different air and altered stars, we must place the creatures. The Pleistocene was the age of the megafauna, of mammals grown to breathtaking proportions. We think first of the woolly mammoths, with their great curving tusks and shaggy coats, living in herds that would have made the ground tremble. But they were far from alone. They shared the mammoth steppe with woolly rhinoceroses, and in the forests and plains of Europe, giant Irish elk carried antlers that spanned 12 feet from tip to tip. In the Americas, the story was just as grand. There were giant ground sloths, some as large as elephants, placidly tearing leaves from trees, and glyptodonts, armadillo-like creatures the size of a small car, their backs protected by a single domed shell. And where there are great herbivores, there are great predators. The saber-toothed cats, Smilodon, with their iconic canine teeth, the enormous short-faced bears, who could look a tall man in the eye even on all fours, and the sleek and powerful cave lions, larger than any big cat alive today. This was the world that existed, thriving and balanced, for tens of thousands of years. It was a world of giants. But as we look upon this magnificent planetary ecosystem, we must acknowledge the great unanswered question that hangs over it all. Where did they go? The end of the Pleistocene saw a mass extinction event that wiped most of these giant creatures from the face of the earth. The reason for their disappearance is one of the most profound and debated mysteries in all of science. Was it the dramatic and rapid climate change at the end of the Ice Age, which radically altered their habitats? Or was it the arrival of a new and uniquely resourceful predator, our own ancestors, whose hunting prowess grew until they could bring down even the largest of prey? The debate between Climate and Clovis, as the argument is sometimes known, continues to this day. The truth is likely a complex tapestry woven from both threads. This vibrant, giant-filled world was a world on the edge of a great forgetting, a biological turning of a page. This is the world our hypothetical pyramid builders would have known. From the vast, chilly plains of the Mammoth Steppe, our journey now turns southward, guiding us into the heart of the African continent. Today, the northern part of this land is dominated by a single immense feature, the Sahara, the largest hot desert in the world. It is a place we associate with profound emptiness, an ocean of sand and rock under a relentless sun. But the world we are visiting, the world before the long cold, was entirely different. To understand the stage upon which our ancient pyramids might have been built, we must first erase this desert from our minds. We must imagine a landscape that is now lost to the world, buried under millions of square miles of sand. Let us picture North Africa not as a desert, but as a sprawling savanna. The wind does not carry sand, but the scent of wet earth and grasses. The horizon is not a stark line of dune against sky, but a soft, hazy distance, broken by acacia trees and rocky outcrops. This is the Green Sahara, a recurring phase in Earth's deep climate history. This transformation from sand to savanna is driven by a celestial rhythm, a slow, gentle waltz performed by our planet. The Earth's orbit around the Sun is not a perfect, constant circle, and the tilt of its axis is not fixed. Over vast cycles of tens of thousands of years, these orbital parameters, known as Milankovitch cycles, shift and change. These tiny alterations in our planet's posture have profound consequences. At certain points in the cycle, the northern hemisphere receives more intense sunlight during the summer. This increased warmth over North Africa dramatically strengthens the African monsoon, pulling vast curtains of rain-rich air from the Atlantic Ocean and drawing them deep into the continent's interior. The desert blooms. What is now barren rock becomes a network of seasonal lakes and wetlands. What is now a sea of sand becomes a sea of grass. This wasn't a rare or fleeting event. It was a recurring pulse, a green heartbeat that revitalized the Sahara again and again over the eons. Our journey has brought us to one of these green periods, a time when life flourished, where today it struggles to survive. This was a world filled with the familiar megafauna of Africa: elephants, giraffes, rhinoceroses, and great herds of antelope. But they were joined by creatures of a more ancient lineage, species now extinct, like the giant buffalo pelorivus, with horns that stretched more than 2 meters across. Crocodiles and hippopotami, today confined to the Nile and rivers further south, inhabited the sprawling lakes and river systems that crisscrossed this verdant land. And the river systems of that time were far grander than they are today. Remembering that the sea levels were lower, the Mediterranean coastline was further north, and the Nile River flowed through a deeper, wider channel on its way to a delta that was a different shape entirely. But the Nile was not the only titan. Modern technology, in the form of satellite radar that can penetrate the deep sands, has revealed a secret hidden from view for millennia: the ghost of a colossal river system. From the mountains of the Central Sahara, the Tamanrasset River once flowed westward, an artery of life more than 3,000 miles long, that would rank among the longest rivers on Earth if it flowed today. We can trace its ancient path, its tributaries, and the outline of its vast delta on the coast of Mauritania. It was a river that dwarfed the modern Nile, draining a basin the size of a subcontinent. In such a world, the Giza Plateau was not a limestone outcrop on the edge of an encroaching desert. It was a well-watered highland, overlooking a lush and vibrant river valley, situated within a vast interconnected ecosystem. It was a prime location, not in a desert kingdom, but in a continental paradise. And here lies another of time's great mysteries. Just as the celestial waltz brought the rains, it eventually took them away. As the Earth's orbit continued its slow, inexorable shift, the monsoons weakened and the desert began to reclaim its territory. But how did this happen? Was the end of the African humid period a slow and gentle decline, a gradual drying over many centuries that allowed animals and people time to migrate south following the retreating rains? Or was it a catastrophic collapse? Some climate models and sediment cores suggest the change could have been terrifyingly abrupt, with the life-giving rains shutting off in a matter of a few centuries, or perhaps even just decades. We simply don't know for sure. The transition from a garden to a desert remains an open debate, a story whose final, crucial chapter is missing. It is a haunting thought, a civilization watching its world turn to dust, its great rivers dwindling to trickles, and finally disappearing completely into the sand, into this green Sahara, this lost world of rivers and grasslands we have painted in our minds. We must now place its inhabitants. The life of this time was not simply an ancient version of a modern safari. It was a world operating on a different scale, a world where the very air seemed to hum with the presence of giants. Humanity in this epoch was not the undisputed master of the landscape. We were a part of the tapestry, a clever and adaptable primate, but one that walked in the shadow of titans. To imagine a civilization rising in such a world is to imagine a people whose entire worldview was shaped by a profound and constant awareness of immense, non-human power. The great herds of the Pleistocene were not just animals in the landscape. They were the landscape's architects. These massive creatures were what ecologists call keystone species, organisms whose influence on their environment is disproportionately large relative to their abundance. The ceaseless grazing and browsing of tens of thousands of giant herbivores, from elephants and ancient giraffes like the formidable moose-like Civatherium to the truly enormous buffalo pelorivus, actively shaped the world around them. Their immense weight compacted soils, their foraging cleared paths and felled trees, and their migrations transported seeds over vast distances. They were the force that kept the savanna open, preventing the encroachment of dense, impassable forests and creating a mosaic of grassland, woodland, and riverine habitats that allowed countless other smaller species to thrive. This process, a trophic cascade, is a reminder that an ecosystem is not a static collection of plants and animals, but a dynamic and interconnected web of relationships. The megafauna were the master weavers of this web. A society of pyramid builders in this world would have to contend with this reality. Their world would be one of deep respect and of necessary caution. The sound of a breaking branch in the distance would not be a trivial thing. The discovery of immense tracks near a water source would be information of the highest importance. We can picture them, perhaps, moving with a quietness and an environmental awareness that we have long since forgotten. Their lives would have been woven into the lives of these creatures. Their myths and legends, their understanding of power, and their sense of their own place in the cosmos would have been born from this daily coexistence. The nature of this coexistence is one of the most compelling and debated questions in paleoanthropology. We have clear evidence that our ancestors hunted these giant beasts. Archaeological sites around the world reveal stone spear points lodged among mammoth ribs and cut marks on the bones of giant bison. This has led to the overkill hypothesis, the idea that humans were such effective predators that they were a primary cause of the megafauna's extinction. But was the relationship always and only one of hunter and prey? Recent discoveries offer a more nuanced and intimate glimpse into this lost world. In the White Sands National Park of New Mexico, a series of fossilized footprints, preserved for over 20,000 years, tell a remarkable story. The tracks show a human, likely a woman, walking for over a mile with a toddler's prints appearing periodically beside her, as if she set the child down from time to time. But she was not alone. Her path is intersected, and at times, clearly followed, by the huge kidney-shaped tracks of a giant ground sloth. The sloth appears to have stalked her, walking directly in her footsteps, rising on its hind legs to get a better view, as evidenced by the changing shape of its prints. Here, frozen in ancient mud, is not a simple story of a hunt, but a drama of tension, awareness, and survival. It is a portrait of a shared world, a moment when the lives of two utterly different beings became deeply and dangerously entangled. Was this the norm? Did our ancestors live in a state of constant, low-level conflict with their giant neighbors? Or did they develop a more complex relationship, one of avoidance, of strategic scavenging, and perhaps even of a kind of fearful reverence? It remains a profound mystery. For a society to develop the stability and organization required for monumental construction, it must have solved this problem. It must have found a way to carve out a safe space within this powerful and unpredictable world. Perhaps their settlements were in naturally defensible locations. Perhaps they had developed technologies or social strategies to deter the great predators. Or perhaps their relationship with these creatures was something we can no longer easily imagine. A form of communication or symbiosis that has left no fossil record. The pyramids, in this scenario, would rise not in an empty land, but in a world teeming with giants, their construction a testament to a people who had learned to live and build in the shadow of megafauna. Having walked through the green savannas of the past and stood in the shadow of its giant creatures, we must now ask the most difficult question of all. Who were the people? What kind of society, what kind of human mind could have conceived of and constructed these silent, geometric mountains of stone in such a world? To answer this, we must journey from the external landscape into the internal one, into the very nature of consciousness itself. For it is possible, perhaps even likely, that the way these ancient people experienced the world and their place within it was fundamentally different from our own. Our earliest glimpses into the prehistoric human mind come from the art it left behind, deep within the caves of Europe and on rock faces across Africa and Australia. Our ancestors painted and carved a world of profound meaning. They rendered the great beasts we have spoken of, the mammoth, the bison, the cave lion, with a vivid and startling grace. For over a century, we have debated the purpose of these images. Was this hunting magic, an attempt to capture the spirit of an animal to ensure a successful hunt? Were they records of great events, a form of storytelling before writing? Or were they something else entirely? This question remains one of the great open mysteries of archaeology. For in asking, why did they create art, we are truly asking, what was it like to be them? As we look closer at this ancient art, we notice something curious. Alongside the magnificent animals, there are other symbols. There are geometric patterns, grids, parallel lines, dots, zigzags, and spirals. For a long time, these were dismissed as simple decorations, but neuroscientists have recognized them as something far more profound. They are entoptic phenomena, visual patterns that are generated by the very structure of the human brain and optic nerve. These are the shapes one might see when closing one's eyes and pressing gently on the lids, or during states of deep meditation, trance, or sensory deprivation. Their prevalence in prehistoric art suggests that the inner world, the landscape of the mind itself, was a place of powerful and direct visionary experience for our ancestors. For them, the barrier between the inner world of vision and the outer world of reality may have been far more permeable than it is for us today. Building on this idea of a different inner experience, let us gently consider a speculative but compelling idea about the evolution of consciousness, known as the theory of the bicameral mind. It proposes that for much of human history, people did not possess the kind of introspective, self-aware consciousness that we experience as an internal monologue. Instead, the mind was split into two parts: a doing part that handled the tasks of daily life and a directing part that provided guidance. But this guidance was not experienced as thought. It was experienced as an auditory hallucination, a clear and commanding voice that was interpreted as coming from an external source, a chieftain, a dead ancestor, or a god. Imagine a mind that does not endlessly question itself, a mind that does not suffer from introspective doubt, but instead receives direct, unambiguous instructions for what to do next. In times of stress or when facing a novel problem, the voice would provide a command. This would not be a society of individuals as we know them, but a collective, each person guided by a shared divine authority speaking directly into their awareness. Such a societal structure would be incredibly stable and capable of astonishing, multi-generational efforts. Could a civilization with a bicameral consciousness have built the pyramids? In this thought experiment, the blueprints would not need to be written down. The complex organizational charts would be unnecessary. The command to quarry the stone, to move the great blocks, to align the structure with a particular star would be a divine imperative heard by all. The motivation would be absolute. The society would function like a great superorganism, its every action harmonized by the internal voices of the gods. This offers a potential answer to how such a colossal feat of engineering could have been achieved without the tools of administration and record-keeping that we deem essential. The records were unnecessary because the instructions were ever present, renewed with every sunrise in the minds of the builders themselves. We are imagining a people whose inner world was not one of quiet contemplation, but of resonant, divine conversation. If the inner world of these ancient builders was one of divine communication, as we have gently speculated, then the outer world of the night sky would have been its grand and silent confirmation. In an age before artificial light, the heavens were not a distant backdrop, but a vital and immediate presence. The sky was a clock of breathtaking accuracy, a map for navigation, and a sacred book of stories and laws. The rhythms of life, the migrations of herds, the fruiting of plants, the arrival of rains, were all announced and governed by the slow, predictable waltz of the stars. For a society poised to build for eternity, the cosmos would have been the only blueprint worth consulting. But the sky, like the land, changes over the deep time we are exploring. The celestial map that we see today is not the same one our ancestors saw, and the difference grows more profound with every millennium we travel into the past. This is because our planet is not perfectly stable in its rotation. Like a spinning top that wobbles slightly as its energy fades, the Earth's axis performs a slow, circular drift, a phenomenon known as axial precession. The wobble is so slow as to be imperceptible in a human lifetime, but over the ages, its effect is monumental. It takes nearly 26,000 years for the axis to complete one full circle. The most important consequence of this celestial wobble is that the identity of the pole star, the fixed point in the northern sky around which all other stars appear to revolve, changes over time. Today, our North Star is Polaris. At the time of the pharaohs, around 4,500 years ago, the pole was marked by a dimmer star called Thuban in the constellation of the dragon Draco. But if we travel back to the age we are visiting, 100,000 years ago or more, the celestial pole would have pointed to a completely different region of the sky near the constellation of Cygnus, the swan. A bright star like Deneb may have served as the anchor of the heavens. This single fact changes everything. The Great Pyramid is renowned for its almost perfect alignment to the cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west. Egyptologists have proposed ingenious methods by which the 4th dynasty builders could have achieved this, likely by tracking the rising and setting of a star to find true east and west. But these methods depend on the sky of their time. For our hypothetical builders, the celestial signposts would be entirely different. They would have oriented their sacred work using a star that is now just another point of light for us. Their true north was the same, a physical property of the planet's rotation. But the heavenly guidepost they used to find it has long since drifted away. This brings us to one of the most enduring mysteries within the Great Pyramid itself. The 4 narrow shafts, 2 extending from the king's chamber and 2 from the queen's chamber, that point outwards at precise angles through the monument's vast stone body. Scholars have long argued they were pathways for the king's soul to ascend to the stars. Indeed, in the era of Khufu, the shafts pointed towards significant constellations: Orion, the celestial representation of the god Osiris, and Sirius, the star of the goddess Isis. But this alignment is a product of that specific time. If we apply the lens of precession and rewind the stars 100 millennia, these shafts point to empty space. Or do they? Did they, in that deep past, align with other celestial bodies of supreme importance? Did one perhaps point to the ancient pole star in Cygnus? Did another mark a place on the horizon where a sacred object rose or set? The shafts remain silent, their original purpose a mystery that deepens the further back in time we look. Beyond the pole star, the entire rhythm of the sky would have been marked by different events. The dynastic Egyptians based their all-important calendar on the heliacal rising of Sirius, the first day that the star reappeared on the eastern horizon just before sunrise, after a long period of invisibility. This event reliably heralded the annual flooding of the Nile, the source of all life. But for a people living in a green Sahara, with its different river systems and climate, Sirius may have held no special significance. Their calendar may have been anchored to the heliacal rising of another star entirely, perhaps Vega or Altair, one of the pyramid's shafts, or a doorway, or an entire causeway, may have been designed to catch the first fleeting glimpse of the sea star's light, the signal that a new year had begun, that the time for a great ritual had arrived. The sky they looked to was our sky, but they read in it a different story, a different set of divine instructions, written in a celestial language that we have now forgotten. From the silent, wheeling map of the ancient stars, let us bring our attention down to earth, down to the very ground, the rock and soil upon which our hypothetical civilization chose to build their eternal monuments. The site for such a grand project could not have been chosen by chance. It must have been a place that was not only sacred in its celestial alignment, but also perfect in its terrestrial form. Today we see the Giza Plateau as a windswept stage of rock and sand, a high, dry shelf overlooking the sprawling city of Cairo. But in the world we are visiting, the world of the Green Sahara, this plateau would have been a profoundly different place. Imagine it not as a barren platform, but as a verdant hill rising from the savanna. Its limestone bones would have been covered in a layer of rich soil, blanketed with grasses and dotted with hardy trees, a green promontory overlooking a wide and fertile river valley. It would have been a landmark visible for miles, a place of natural prominence and authority. But its true suitability lay deeper, in the very substance of the rock itself. The builders, whoever they were, must have possessed a geological knowledge so intimate it bordered on intuition. They would have understood that this was no ordinary hill. The Giza Plateau is a geological layer cake, an immense block of limestone left behind by an ancient sea that covered this land millions of years ago. Known to geologists as the Mokattam Formation, it is not a uniform mass. It is composed of distinct layers, each with its own character. The upper layers, upon which the foundations of the Great Pyramids rest, are made of a hard, durable limestone capable of supporting immense weight without fracturing. Below this robust capstone layer, the rock becomes softer, more porous, and stratified into beds that are easier to separate. This geological arrangement is a miracle of convenience. The plateau was both the foundation and the quarry. The builders could establish their unwavering base on the hard upper rock and then quarry the millions of core blocks they needed from the softer layers on the slopes right beside their construction site. This eliminated one of the greatest logistical challenges, transporting the primary building material over long distances. The Giza Plateau was a self-contained engine for its own creation, and at its base, another crucial feature made the entire enterprise possible. Today, the pyramids stand at a distance from the Nile, but recent archaeological work has confirmed the existence of a long-lost arm of the river, the Khufu branch, that once flowed right to the edge of the plateau. In the 4th dynasty, this waterway was the vital channel for bringing supplies and stones from afar. In the much wetter world we are imagining, this would not have been a minor branch, but a powerful, perennial river, a main artery in the vast water system of the Green Sahara. It would have formed a natural harbor at the foot of the hill, allowing barges carrying even the most massive stones, like the granite beams for the inner chambers, to be brought directly to the work site from their distant quarries. The plateau also offered another gift: inspiration. The surface of the land, before any work began, was not perfectly flat. It was sculpted by ages of wind and, in our timeline, water. Dotted across its surface were natural rock formations known as yardangs, long streamlined ridges carved from the bedrock by erosion. It is from one of these natural outcrops, a large yardang of harder limestone, that most scholars believe the Great Sphinx was carved. This presents a fascinating and unanswerable question about the interplay between nature and art. Did the builders see a rock that vaguely resembled a reclining lion and decide to release it from the stone? Or was the shape they saw something else entirely? How much of the Sphinx's form was dictated by the natural shape of the rock, and how much was imposed by the vision of the artist? In a world that had endured millennia of rainfall, this yardang would have been weathered not by wind, but by water, perhaps giving it a shape even more evocative, a form that spoke to the builders, a spirit of the land already present that they chose to honor and define. The plateau, then, was not a blank canvas. It was a collaborator in the great work. It offered a firm foundation, the stone for the walls, a waterway for transport, and even the inspiration for its most enigmatic guardian. The stage is now set. We have our builders, a people guided by the heavens and their own inner voices. We have their canvas, a verdant and geologically perfect plateau, blessed with a great river at its feet. The stone is present, the will is present, the celestial blueprint is clear. But now we arrive at the most practical and perhaps most profound of all the questions. How did they do the work? How did human hands in this distant past quarry, cut, and shape the very bones of the earth with such impossible precision? The story of the tools is where the mystery deepens from a question of when to a question of how. Let us first consider the limestone, the material that makes up the vast bulk of the pyramids. For the millions of core blocks, the task, while monumental, is one we can comprehend. The softer layers of the Giza Plateau could be worked with the known tools of the ancient world. We can imagine the rhythmic tapping of copper chisels against the pale stone, the resonant thud of wooden mallets. We can picture teams of quarrymen cutting deep channels, then driving wooden wedges into the fissures. When soaked with water, these wedges would slowly expand with an irresistible force, splitting a multi-ton block from the bedrock with a great groan. This process, repeated millions of times, is a testament to human organization and endurance. It is a wonder of labor, but it is not a technological paradox. The true enigma begins when we leave the soft limestone and descend into the inner chambers, to the sarcophagi and the massive granite blocks that roof them. Granite is a different beast entirely. It is an igneous rock, born of fire, immensely hard and crystalline. Here, the simple tools of the limestone quarry are rendered useless. To understand why, we must consider the fundamental physics of stone, a principle known as hardness. On a scientific scale of hardness, where a diamond is a 10, soft copper is merely a 3. The granite of Aswan, however, ranks as a 6 or 7. The physical rule is simple and absolute. A softer material can't cut a harder one. A copper chisel striking granite is like a finger pushing against a brick wall. It is the tool that yields, that deforms, that is destroyed. The conventional archaeological explanation for how the dynastic Egyptians overcame this problem is one of patient ingenuity. It is proposed they used copper saws, not to cut the rock directly, but to act as carriers for an abrasive slurry. By dragging the soft blade back and forth across the granite, while pouring water in a harder material, like quartz sand, into the groove, the sand would do the cutting. The saw was merely the guide. An even more direct method, evidenced by countless artifacts, was the use of dolerite pounders. These were heavy ball-like rocks, themselves harder than granite, which workers would have used to simply bash the stone into submission over excruciatingly long periods. We must picture hundreds of men, working for months, or even years, to pulverize the surface of a single block, slowly, painstakingly, reducing it to dust until the desired shape emerged. It is a method of almost unimaginable brute force and patience. And for many of the granite artifacts we find, this explanation seems plausible. We see the saw marks, we see the rough surfaces, but then we encounter the paradoxes. We encounter granite boxes cut with a precision that rivals modern machining. We find surfaces polished to a mirror sheen and interior corners that are perfectly, geometrically square. And most mysteriously of all, we find holes drilled into this impossibly hard stone that seem to defy the simple tools proposed. Some of these holes, left by ancient core drills, contain helical grooves like the thread of a screw. These spiraling marks suggest that the drill was not just slowly grinding its way down, but was advancing into the rock at a constant and surprisingly high speed. Modern engineers have calculated the required feed rate to produce such marks and have concluded that it would require immense consistent pressure, a force difficult to imagine being applied by a few men leaning on a wooden, hand-powered drill. What technology could leave such a signature? What force could drive a drill through solid granite with such confidence? This is where the standard explanation begins to fray, and the space for wonder expands. We are not forced to imagine flying machines or laser beams, but we can allow ourselves to wonder about a lost science. Did these ancient builders understand principles of acoustics and resonance that allowed them to soften the stone? Did they have a method for creating and applying immense, focused pressure? The stones themselves are silent witnesses, bearing the marks of their creation. Some of these marks speak of patient, simple labor, but others seem to whisper of a technology that is utterly alien to our understanding of the ancient world. A method of working stone that was not born of brute force, but of a different and now forgotten kind of knowledge. A block of granite, weighing as much as 10 elephants, now sits perfectly formed in its quarry, gleaming with a polish that seems to have been breathed onto its surface rather than scoured. Its creation is a mystery, but its journey is a challenge of an entirely different order. Now it must be moved, it must be transported, and then, most impossibly, it must be lifted hundreds of feet into the air to find its place in the heart of a growing mountain of stone. Here, our search for lost technologies moves from the fine-grained detail of tool marks to the colossal mechanics of megalithic construction. The conventional answer to this challenge is as monumental as the pyramid itself: ramps and human power. The enduring image is one of thousands of men, their bodies straining, pulling on thick ropes to haul a great stone block set upon a wooden sledge up a vast earthen ramp. Archaeologists have long debated the exact form such a ramp would have taken. Was it a single, long ramp, straight as an arrow that grew ever higher and longer as the pyramid rose? Such a structure would have eventually contained more material than the pyramid itself. Or was it a more efficient ramp that corkscrewed around the pyramid's exterior? Or perhaps a sophisticated internal ramp, zigzagging its way up from within? This question of the ramps remains one of the greatest open-ended mysteries in Egyptology, because for all the theories, no conclusive evidence of such a colossal structure has ever been found. Let us allow ourselves to wonder if there was another way, a way that was not about brute force, but about a deeper understanding of natural principles. Let us remember the world we have built for our ancient civilization, a lush land with a great river flowing at the foot of their plateau. What if they used this abundant resource, water, in a way far more ingenious than for simple transport? The power of water is not just in its flow, but in its lift. This is the timeless law of physics we call Archimedes' principle, the law of buoyancy. An object placed in water is lifted by a force equal to the weight of the water it displaces. A great stone, which is an impossible burden in the air, becomes a more manageable weight when submerged. Could this principle have been harnessed on a grand scale? Imagine a series of massive locks or caissons built against the rising sides of the pyramid. A stone block is floated on a barge or a raft of reeds into the lowest chamber. The chamber is sealed, and water, channeled from the river or a high reservoir, is used to flood it, lifting the barge and its cargo effortlessly to the level of the next chamber. The process is repeated, lifting the stone step by step up the side of the monument. Such a system would be an engineering marvel, requiring incredible skill in hydrology and construction. But it relies on no fantastical, unknown energies. It is a technology of profound cleverness, powered by gravity and water alone. And what of other, more subtle forces? Legends across the globe, from Tibet to the islands of the Pacific, contain stories of great stones being lifted and moved by sound, by the power of chanting or sacred instruments. In our modern world, this sounds like pure myth. Yet in our laboratories, on a very small scale, acoustic levitation is a reality. Focused sound waves can be used to create pressure points in the air that can lift and suspend small objects. Could our ancient builders, with their possible attunement to resonance and vibration, have discovered a way to apply these principles on a megalithic scale? We cannot say, but it is a thought that gently hums with possibility, suggesting a science that worked in harmony with the inherent frequencies of the world. This idea of a lost, subtle science is not without its strange modern echoes. In the last century, in Florida, a single man named Edward Leedskalnin, standing just 5 feet tall, built a fantastic structure called the Coral Castle. Working alone, mostly at night, he quarried, carved, and erected over 1,000 tons of coral rock, with some individual blocks weighing nearly 30 tons. How he did it remains a complete mystery. He had no modern cranes, no powerful machinery. He claimed to have rediscovered the secrets of the pyramid builders, using principles of magnetism and what he called cosmic force. While his explanation remains obscure, the result of his work stands today as a silent testament. It is a powerful reminder that there may be methods of interacting with the physical world, of manipulating great weights, that our modern science has overlooked or forgotten. It proves that what seems impossible to us may only be impossible within our current set of tools and assumptions. The builders of the pyramids, perhaps, simply had a better set of assumptions. Having contemplated the immense challenge of shaping and lifting the stones for the pyramids, let us now turn our gaze to the creature that rests at their feet, a silent guardian half man, half lion, seemingly eternal in its watch over the plateau, the Great Sphinx of Giza. According to the story we know, it is the sentinel of the necropolis, carved during the reign of the pharaoh Khafra. Its face, a portrait of the king himself, a symbol of royal power and divine intelligence. For centuries, it has been seen as a contemporary of the pyramids it guards, a key part of the Fourth Dynasty's grand design. But a monument, like a living thing, carries the story of its life etched upon its surface. And the story written on the stone body of the Sphinx and on the walls of the enclosure from which it was carved is a story of time and of water. It is a story that has sparked one of the most profound and persistent debates in modern archaeology, for it seems to whisper of a past far older than the pharaohs. To read this story, we must first learn the language of erosion. In a desert landscape, stone is primarily weathered in two ways, by wind and by water. Aeolian erosion, the work of wind and sand, is a relentless process of abrasion. Over thousands of years, wind-driven sand acts like a fine grit sandpaper, scouring away softer layers of rock more quickly than harder ones. This creates a distinctive pattern of sharp, horizontal, layered undercutting. We see this signature on countless monuments and natural rock formations across Egypt. It is the expected fingerprint of a desert climate. Fluvial erosion, the work of water, leaves a completely different mark. It is the signature of heavy, sustained rainfall running down the face of the rock for millennia. Water does not carve sharp horizontal bands. It creates deep vertical fissures and a soft, rounded, undulating profile, like the gentle rolling of hills. It is a signature of a wet, rainy climate, not an arid one. Herein lies the great anomaly of the Giza Plateau. While many monuments show the expected signs of wind and sand erosion, the body of the Sphinx, and, most importantly, the limestone walls of the pit from which it was carved, display the unmistakable classic profile of profound water erosion. The deep vertical fissures and rounded rock suggest that this monument stood for an immense period of time, under a sky that released not sand, but torrential, life-giving rain. This is the core of the Sphinx water erosion hypothesis, a controversial but compelling theory that challenges the very foundations of the conventional timeline. The geological evidence asks a simple question: when was there enough rainfall in this part of North Africa to carve these deep fissures into the rock? The climate during Khafra's reign 4,500 years ago was already arid, very similar to today's. We must travel much further back on our journey through time to find a climate that fits the evidence. We must return to the era we have been exploring, the period at the end of the last ice age, when the Sahara was not a desert, but a green savanna, watered by powerful monsoons. The last of these African humid periods ended thousands of years before the first pharaohs. The erosion pattern on the Sphinx seems to be a geological echo from this lost, greener world. The mystery deepens when we look at the structures immediately in front of the Sphinx. The Sphinx Temple and the Valley Temple are two enigmatic buildings constructed from colossal limestone blocks. Crucially, geologists have confirmed that these blocks were quarried directly from the Sphinx enclosure itself. They are the very pieces of stone removed from around the body of the Sphinx as it was being carved. And these temple blocks show the very same distinctive water-weathered profile as the Sphinx and the enclosure wall. This is a critical detail. It suggests that the Sphinx and these temples were created in a single continuous building project. And then together, this entire complex must have endured the thousands of years of rainfall that weathered its surfaces before the age of the Old Kingdom. The pharaohs in this scenario did not build the complex. They found it. They discovered it already ancient, already deeply eroded, likely buried up to its neck in the sands that had since swept in. They repaired it, they rededicated it, and Khafra may well have had its ancient, weathered face recarved in his own likeness. But the original monument, this theory suggests, was a relic from a forgotten age. Mainstream Egyptology maintains that the weathering is the result of other factors, chemical erosion from morning dew, or the particularly poor quality of the limestone layers. But the question lingers, as patient and as silent as the Sphinx itself, a guardian not of a king's tomb, but of a history far, far deeper than we can imagine. The Sphinx holds its gaze, its stone body bearing the scars of forgotten reigns, a lonely witness to a history that seems to defy our own. As we contemplate this single, profound anomaly, a new question begins to form, rippling outwards from the Giza Plateau. If a civilization of such antiquity and skill existed here, in this green corner of ancient Africa, were they alone? Or was the monument they left behind not an isolated miracle, but a single note in a song that was once sung across the entire planet? To explore this, we must lift our gaze from the sands of Egypt and look for echoes of this lost world in other lands. Across the globe, there are other enigmatic stone structures that seem to challenge the simple story of our past. The great trilithons of Stonehenge in England, the haunting Moai statues of Easter Island, the impossibly fitted polygonal walls of Sacsayhuaman in Peru. The conventional view holds that these are the magnificent but entirely independent achievements of separate cultures, their similarities born only of a shared human impulse to build and to last. But if we allow for a deeper timeline, we can begin to see faint, persistent threads that seem to connect these disparate sites, weaving them into a single, mysterious tapestry. One of the most powerful of these threads is their shared fascination with the heavens. The study of this ancient relationship with the cosmos is called archaeoastronomy. It reveals that cultures all over the world, separated by vast oceans and thousands of years, consistently oriented their most sacred structures with incredible precision to the same celestial events. Countless megalithic sites are aligned to the solstices and the equinoxes, the turning points of the sun's annual journey. It is a near universal signature of sacred architecture. Beyond the sun, specific constellations also appear again and again. The 3 stars of Orion's belt, for example. The pyramids at Giza, according to some researchers, form a map of these 3 stars on the ground. Thousands of miles away, and supposedly thousands of years later, the Great Pyramids of Teotihuacan in Mexico are laid out in a pattern that also appears to mimic these same 3 stars. And the Hopi people of North America, whose ancestors lived in the region, held Orion as a key figure in their cosmology. Is it merely a coincidence that these separate cultures, with no known contact, all chose to memorialize the same 3 stars in their most monumental architecture? Or is it the echo of a shared ancient heritage? The possibility of such a heritage is bolstered by controversial but intriguing discoveries at other sites. In Indonesia, there is a megalithic site called Gunung Padang, a terraced pyramid built upon a volcanic hill. On the surface, the site is dated to a few thousand years ago, but a team of geologists conducted a more intensive study using ground-penetrating radar and core drilling. Deep beneath the visible terraces, they discovered evidence of older, sophisticated, man-made chambers and structures. And by carbon dating organic material found in the mortar between the deep stones, they arrived at astonishing dates, suggesting the earliest phases of construction on the site may have begun over 20,000 years ago, in the depths of the last ice age. While these findings are not accepted by mainstream archaeology, they represent a persistent piece of data that points to the possibility of a forgotten age of global construction. When we consider these threads together, the shared building style of massive, precisely fitted stones, the common focus on celestial alignments, and the possibility of contemporaneous, prehistoric dates, a grand and speculative question emerges. Is there a deliberate, intelligent pattern to the placement of these ancient sites? Some researchers have proposed the existence of a global geometric pattern, suggesting that many of the world's most ancient sacred sites are not located randomly. They appear to lie along great circles, or are separated from one another by precise harmonic fractions of the Earth's circumference. Could it be that the Giza Plateau is not an isolated wonder, but the prime meridian of an ancient, global sacred geography? Were these sites part of a worldwide network, a system of stone sentinels designed to map the heavens onto the Earth, for a purpose we no longer comprehend? We have no written records, no definitive proof. We have only these faint but recurring patterns, these whispers of a global connection. We are left with the haunting image of the Earth itself, dotted with silent stone markers, a planet-sized monument to a civilization that, perhaps, saw the world not as a collection of separate continents, but as a single, resonant whole. Let us hold this image in our minds: a connected world, a global network of sacred sites aligned to the stars and built with a forgotten science. A civilization, perhaps, at its apex, living in a verdant, stable world. But the universe is a place of cycles, of rhythms, of immense and unstoppable change. The very same celestial mechanics that gifted our ancient builders their green paradise would, in time, become the engine of their world's undoing. The great astronomical clock was ticking, and its hands were slowly, inexorably, moving towards a season of profound cold. The engine of this change was the same gentle planetary waltz we spoke of before. The Milankovitch cycles, as the Earth continued its slow looping journey through space, its tilt and orbit shifted. The phase that had once intensified the summer sun over the northern hemisphere passed. A new phase began, one that delivered less solar energy during the critical northern summers. At first, the difference would have been imperceptible, but its consequences, accumulating over centuries, were absolute. In the vast northern lands of America, Europe, and Asia, the winter snows began to linger. They no longer melted completely in the weaker summer sun. Year after year, the snowpack deepened, its lower layers compressing under their own immense weight, transforming first into dense, granular ice, and then into colossal sheets of glacial ice. As these ice sheets grew, they began to exert their own powerful influence on the climate. Their brilliant white surfaces reflected more and more sunlight back into space, a phenomenon known as the albedo effect. This cooled the planet further, which in turn allowed the ice sheets to grow even faster. It was a slow, creeping feedback loop, a planetary system tipping out of balance. We know this story of the ancient climate with remarkable precision, not from written records, but from a library far older and more complete. We read it in the great ice sheets of Greenland and Antarctica. For hundreds of thousands of years, snow has fallen on these frozen continents, burying and preserving the story of the atmosphere in tiny air bubbles and in the very water molecules themselves. Scientists have drilled cores through this ice, miles deep, pulling up a continuous, layered record of time. The ratio of two different types of oxygen atoms, heavy oxygen 18 and light oxygen 16, trapped in these ancient layers of ice, acts as a precise thermometer of the past. It is from these frozen chronicles that we have learned that the coming of the ice was not the gentle, steady decline we might imagine. The climate of the Pleistocene was not stable. The ice core records show a system that was prone to wild, unpredictable swings. Scientists call these rapid climate shifts Dansgaard-Oeschger events. These were not slow, gradual changes, but abrupt, planetary-scale flickers. The world would be locked in a cold glacial state for centuries, and then in the span of a single human lifetime, perhaps in just a few decades, the temperature would suddenly leap upwards into a much warmer, wetter state. This warmer period would last for a time, and then the slow slide back into the cold would begin again. For our hypothetical civilization, life would have become a constant struggle against this growing instability. The predictable rhythms of the seasons, the reliable monsoon rains, the very foundation of their agricultural or social calendar would have begun to fail. Imagine generations born into a world where the climate was no longer a dependable partner, but a chaotic and fearsome adversary. The celestial order they had so perfectly mirrored on the ground was being drowned out by a new and terrifying terrestrial disorder. The divine voices they may have heard in their minds would now have to compete with the howl of strange new winds. And while we can see this instability in the records, the ultimate cause, the final trigger of the ice ages, remains one of the great open questions in climate science. We know the orbital cycles are the pacemaker, setting the tempo for the great shifts. But what was the final event that pushed the Earth over the precipice, from the flickering instability of a cooling period into the full, unyielding grip of a true glacial maximum? Was it a sudden change in ocean currents, a series of catastrophic volcanic eruptions, or a complex cascade of feedback loops that, once started, could not be stopped? The final verdict is still locked away in the Earth's deep memory. But for the people of this lost age, the cause would have been irrelevant. All they would have known was that their world was changing, the cold was gathering, and the long winter was coming. The flickering and unpredictable climate was the overture. The slow gathering of the ice in the north, the failing of the monsoons in the south, these were the first movements of a symphony of planetary change. But there is evidence to suggest that the final, dramatic transition into the deep freeze of the last glacial maximum may have been heralded not by a slow decline, but by a sudden, catastrophic event. Let us gently consider a theory that speaks of a day when the sky itself fell, a day that may have fractured the ancient world and accelerated its descent into winter. This theory centers on a period known to geologists as the Younger Dryas, a sudden and dramatic return to Ice Age conditions that began around 12,900 years ago, interrupting a period of global warming. The cause of this abrupt deep freeze has long been a mystery, but one compelling and controversial hypothesis points to the heavens. It suggests that the Earth, in its journey through the cosmos, passed through the fragmented remains of a giant comet. This encounter would not have been a single massive impact, like the one that ended the age of the dinosaurs, but a terrifying and chaotic series of airbursts and impacts over the entire northern hemisphere. Imagine that day. For the people on the ground, the sky would have become a terrifying spectacle. Objects invisible in the dark of space would have blazed through the atmosphere, creating explosions with the force of thousands of nuclear bombs. These airbursts, many happening high above the Great Northern Ice Sheet, would have had unimaginable consequences. They would have flash-melted billions of tons of ice in an instant, unleashing colossal freshwater floods, the source, perhaps, of the great flood myths that are a near-universal feature of human culture. The shock waves would have flattened forests for thousands of square miles, and the heat would have ignited continent-spanning wildfires. The evidence for such an event is microscopic, yet compelling. Across North America, Europe, and Asia, scientists have found a thin, dark layer in the soil known as the black mat that dates precisely to the beginning of the Younger Dryas. Within this layer, they have found materials that speak of an extraterrestrial event. There are nanodiamonds, microscopic crystals that can only be formed under the kind of extreme temperature and pressure generated by a cosmic impact. There are tiny glassy spherules of melted rock and elevated concentrations of rare elements like platinum and iridium, which are more common in asteroids and comets than in the Earth's crust. This layer marks a profound and devastating boundary in the Earth's history. It is a tombstone. Below this black mat, we find the abundant fossils of the great megafauna we have spoken of: the mammoths, the saber-toothed cats, the giant sloths. Above it, they are almost all gone. It also marks the disappearance of the Clovis people in North America, a sophisticated Paleo-Indian culture known for their distinctive spear points. For the proponents of this impact hypothesis, this is no coincidence. The event, they argue, was a global cataclysm that shattered ecosystems, drove dozens of species to extinction, and dealt a devastating blow to the human populations of the time. Of course, this is a highly debated academic mystery. Many scientists argue that the evidence can be explained by terrestrial causes, and that the extinctions were the result of the more gradual climate shifts and human hunting we have already discussed. The nanodiamonds, they suggest, could have been formed by wildfires, and the extinctions were not so instantaneous. The debate is a vivid example of how difficult it is to read the story of the deep past, a story whose pages are torn and whose language is often ambiguous. But if such an event did happen, it would provide a powerful and dramatic mechanism for our story. For a global civilization already stressed by a chaotic climate, a cosmic impact would have been the final, unthinkable blow. It would have destroyed their societies, broken their network of knowledge, and plunged the world into a nuclear winter, accelerating the growth of the ice sheets and the coming of the Great Cold. The sky, which had once been their sacred map and clock, would have become a source of terror and destruction. The age of wonder would have given way to an age of survival. In the aftermath of the Great Cataclysm, a deep and unnatural twilight would have fallen upon the world. The skies, choked with the dust of impacts and the smoke of continent-spanning fires, would have veiled the sun, amplifying the cooling trend that was already underway. The planetary system, already unstable, was pushed past its breaking point. The flickering ceased. The slow descent into cold was over. The great winter had finally, truly arrived. This was the beginning of the last glacial maximum, the coldest and harshest period of the Ice Age. In the north, the snows that had been accumulating for centuries now began to grow with terrifying speed. Two colossal ice sheets, the Laurentide in North America and the Fennoscandian in northern Europe, metastasized across the land. This was not like the snow on a winter field. This was ice on a geological scale. At their thickest, these glaciers were more than 2 miles deep, a weight of water so immense that it depressed the very crust of the Earth into the mantle below. So much of the planet's water was drawn into these frozen titans that global sea levels fell by 400 feet, exposing continental shelves and creating new coastlines on a world utterly transformed. These great ice sheets, of course, never reached Egypt. Their southern march stopped thousands of miles away, but their influence was total. They were the cold heart of a new global climate system, a heart that pumped frigid air and altered weather patterns across the entire planet. The gentle, warm monsoons that had once watered the Sahara were a distant memory, replaced by a colder, harsher regime. But the Ice Age was not a simple story of universal cold and dryness. The new climate, in its own way, was complex and full of strange paradoxes. While the North froze, the radical shift in the planet's jet streams pushed rainfall patterns into new territories. In many of the world's great deserts, the Ice Age was, surprisingly, a time of immense lakes. These were the pluvial lakes, vast bodies of fresh water that have long since vanished. In North America, Lake Bonneville, the ancestor of the Great Salt Lake, covered an area the size of Lake Michigan. In the heart of Africa, Lake Megachad swelled to become larger than the modern Caspian Sea, a vast freshwater ocean in the southern Sahara. So, what would this new world have looked like at Giza? The end of the Green Sahara was not a direct transition into the hot, arid desert we know today. Instead, let us imagine the plateau entering a long period of cold, damp, northern weather. The air is perpetually chilly. The sky is often a pearlescent gray, and a fine mist clings to the great stone monuments. The rains are no longer the warm, seasonal downpours of the monsoon, but a cold, persistent drizzle that falls for much of the year. And in the winters, it snows. Let us picture the pyramids in this climate. The limestone, once sun-bleached and warm, is now dark with moisture, streaked with green and black from hardy mosses and lichens. Water seeps into every tiny crack, freezing in the winter nights, expanding and turning the solid rock into a fragile tracery of microscopic fractures. On a winter morning, the Great Sphinx would awaken to find its leonine shoulders and regal head dusted with a fine layer of white. The great plazas and causeways, once thronged with builders or priests, are now silent, empty, and veiled in snow. The world that had built these monuments was gone, replaced by a climate that was actively, patiently, trying to unbuild them. Yet even in this frozen world, life held on. The great ice sheets were not a single unbroken mass. One of the ongoing debates in paleoclimatology is over the extent of ice-free refuges. High mountain peaks, known as nunataks, would have poked through the ice sheets like lonely rocky islands in a frozen sea. And at times, vast ice-free corridors may have opened up, allowing herds of hardy animals and, perhaps, bands of human survivors to move through the glacial landscape. Could the descendants of our great civilization have found their way to such a refuge? Could they have survived in a warm southern valley or a sheltered coastal enclave, huddled around their fires, preserving a fragmented memory, a few precious stories of the glorious world that had been lost to the ice? We can only wonder. But for the pyramids themselves, there was no escape. They could only endure their long, cold slumber, a silent vigil under a blanket of white. The pyramids and their guardian sphinx are now asleep, shrouded in the mists and snows of a changed world. The stones can wait. They are patient. They have an eternity. But what of the builders? What of the living, breathing people with their divine voices and their celestial maps? What becomes of a civilization when its world dies? The stones may endure the long winter, but a culture, a body of knowledge, is a far more fragile thing. It is a warm and living flame, and in the bitter winds of a global catastrophe, such a flame can be extinguished with heartbreaking ease. In a society without a written language, all knowledge, all history, all science exists only in the delicate web of cultural memory. It is a story passed from a master to an apprentice, a ritual taught by a priest to an acolyte, a history recited by an elder to a child. This chain of oral tradition is only as strong as the living minds that hold it. When a society is stable and prosperous, this chain can transmit vast and complex information with incredible fidelity for thousands of years. But when that society is shattered, when its people are scattered, when survival becomes the only imperative, the chain breaks. Imagine the survivors of the cataclysms that heralded the Great Winter. They are no longer living in a verdant paradise, but struggling in a cold and hostile world. The high knowledge of their ancestors, the complex mathematics of celestial alignment, the subtle physics of moving megaliths, the geological secrets of the quarry, this knowledge is now a useless luxury. The skills that matter now are the oldest skills of all: how to find shelter, how to track the hardy animals that remain, how to endure the cold. The priest astronomers and the master engineers would perish, and with them, their libraries of knowledge would vanish from the earth forever. In the space of a few desperate generations, 1,000 generations of accumulated wisdom could be utterly and completely lost. The great forgetting would begin. This cultural collapse may have been mirrored by a biological one. Studies of our own genetics suggest that the human race has passed through several population bottlenecks in its deep history, times when our numbers crashed to perhaps only a few thousand individuals worldwide. The cause of these ancient events is a profound mystery, but a planetary-scale disaster like the one that triggered the Ice Age is a powerful candidate. It's a chilling thought that the ancestors of every person alive today may be descended from a tiny scattered handful of survivors who made it through the Great Winter. We are perhaps a species with amnesia because we are all the children of a global apocalypse. And yet, is it possible that in the face of the coming darkness, some attempt was made to preserve the flame? The archaeological record contains a strange and powerful precedent. In modern-day Turkey, the site of Göbekli Tepe stands as a testament to a sophisticated culture of hunter-gatherers that flourished over 11,000 years ago, right on the cusp of this age of ice and flood. They built a magnificent temple of huge T-shaped pillars carved with exquisite art. But the most mysterious thing they did was their last act. For reasons we may never understand, they deliberately and meticulously buried their entire creation under thousands of tons of earth, creating an artificial hill that preserved it perfectly until its discovery in our own time. Was this a unique act, Or was it an echo of a more ancient tradition? Could our pyramid builders, seeing their world ending, have performed a similar act of preservation? They could not bury their creations, for they were too large. But could they have sealed them, concealed their true purpose, and entrusted a fragment of their knowledge to a chosen few, a lineage of survivors tasked with remembering? Perhaps the long sleep was not an accident, but a deliberate act of hibernation, a message in a bottle cast into an ocean of time, waiting for the climate to warm and for humanity to be ready once again to ask the great questions. But for those living through the collapse, this would be no comfort. They would only know that the world of their ancestors was gone, its glories transformed into the confused and frightening myths of gods and monsters, its history dissolving into the silence of a frozen world. For thousands of years, the world lay in a frozen stasis. The great winter held the northern hemisphere in its grip, and a cold, quiet stillness settled over the planet. But no season is eternal. The same celestial clockwork that had commanded the coming of the ice, the slow and patient waltz of our planet's orbit, eventually turned once more. The long winter reached its solstice, and the great thaw began. It did not happen all at once. It began as a subtle shift in the balance of power. The northern summers, ever so slowly, began to grow warmer. The sun felt a little stronger, lingered a little longer in the sky. At the immense southern edges of the great ice sheets, the winter's advance faltered, then stopped. For the first time in millennia, the summer melt began to win. Water, the lifeblood of the world, was being liberated from its frozen prison. Trickles became streams, streams became torrents, carving great tunnels and caverns within the ice itself. At the snout of the glaciers, colossal waterfalls, miles wide, began to pour forth, heralding the end of an age. But this reawakening was not a gentle or peaceful affair. The world was not melting. It was breaking apart. The release of such immense energies was a violent and chaotic process. In North America, for example, a vast body of water called Glacial Lake Missoula, larger than some of the modern Great Lakes, was held in place only by a towering dam of ice. As the climate warmed, this dam weakened and failed. The resulting deluge is almost beyond comprehension. In a matter of days, a flood with 10 times the flow of all the rivers in the world today was unleashed, scouring the landscape of eastern Washington down to the bare basalt bedrock, creating the bizarre alien landscape we now call the channeled scablands. This was the kind of force that was reshaping the world. As the meltwater poured from the continents, the oceans began to rise. This was not always a gradual process. Around 14,500 years ago, something happened that caused a sudden, catastrophic surge. Known to scientists as Meltwater Pulse 1A, it was a period where global sea levels may have risen by as much as 20 meters, over 60 feet, in just a few hundred years. The exact source of this immense and sudden flood remains a subject of intense academic debate. Was it the collapse of an ice sheet in Antarctica, or the draining of a great lake in North America? We don't know for certain, but for any surviving human populations living on the coasts, it would have been an apocalypse, their lands swallowed by a relentlessly rising sea, the very maps of the world being redrawn before their eyes. And as the land was freed from its immense burden of ice, it began to stir. The sheer weight of the 2-mile-thick glaciers had pressed the Earth's crust down into the soft mantle below. Now, with that weight removed, the land itself began to slowly rise in a process called isostatic rebound. Like a memory foam mattress slowly regaining its shape, entire regions like Scandinavia and the Hudson Bay began to float upwards, a process that continues to this very day. The landscape that emerged from beneath the retreating ice was new, raw, and profoundly scarred. It was a world of vast gravelly plains, of newly carved river valleys, and of immense basins that would fill to become the Great Lakes. Life, patient and resilient, followed the retreating ice. First came the hardy lichens and mosses, then the grasses and shrubs, and finally, the great forests of birch and pine marching northward, reclaiming the barren land. And with the plants came the animals, moving into the new world, a world free of the great giants of the past, a world that was now open, empty, and waiting. Back at Giza, the climate was changing once more. The long, cold, damp period was ending. The snows became a memory. The air grew warmer, drier. The sun, now dominant in the sky, began to bake the moisture from the ancient stones. The green savanna and the cold wetland that followed it were both gone. The age of the desert, the Sahara we know today, was about to be born. And the pyramids, emerging from their long slumber, waited silently under this new, warmer sun for the world of man to find them again. The new world is a quiet one. The great violence of the thaw has subsided, and a new climatic rhythm has settled upon the planet. The sun shines on the Giza Plateau, warming the silent stones, and for the first time in many thousands of years, the world feels stable again. Into this quiet, empty landscape, a new humanity begins to emerge. They are the descendants of the scattered survivors who endured the long winter, their numbers slowly growing, their tribes cautiously expanding into the lands left raw and empty by the retreating ice. These are a people on the cusp of the greatest transformation in the human story, the Neolithic Revolution. For millennia, their ancestors had been nomadic hunter-gatherers, moving with the seasons and the migrations of herds. But in this new, warmer world, some groups were beginning to learn a different way of life. They were learning to cultivate wild grasses, to save the seeds, and to plant them in the fertile soils of the river valleys. They were learning to tame the wild ox and the goat, to live with their herds in a new partnership. It was the dawn of agriculture, a shift that would give rise to the first villages, the first experience of surplus, and a completely new relationship with the earth. As the Great Sahara, which had enjoyed one last brief green phase after the Ice Age, began its final inexorable shift into the arid desert we know today, its inhabitants were pushed towards the last reliable sources of water. This migration is central to the enduring mystery of the origin of the dynastic Egyptians. Small bands of these Neolithic cattle herders and proto-farmers began to move from the drying savannas towards the great singular artery of life that remained, the Nile Valley. They were the pioneers, the seeds of a new civilization, entering a land that was new to them. These people were not primitive. They carried with them a sophisticated culture and a deep connection to the sky. In the Nubian desert, south of Egypt, they had already built one of the world's oldest known astronomical sites, a place called Nabta Playa. It was a small, elegant circle of stones, some aligned to the summer solstice, others tracking the constellation of Orion. It was a masterpiece of human-scale sacred architecture, a testament to their intelligence and their need to find order in the cosmos. They understood the sky. They understood how to work with stone. They understood how to build for the gods. Now, let us imagine a band of these people, their own small stone circles fresh in their memory, making their way north, down the Nile into Lower Egypt. They follow the river, their cattle grazing on the rich floodplain. One day they crest a low rise of hills, and for the first time they see them. Across the valley, rising from the edge of the western plateau, are three perfect geometric mountains, and at their feet, a colossal, half-human beast staring out towards the rising sun. What would they have felt in that moment? Not admiration for a great feat of engineering, not recognition of a human achievement, but a profound, soul-shaking awe. The kind of awe one feels in the face of something truly divine, something that does not belong to the world of mortals. Their own sacred circles at Nabta Playa could have fit comfortably upon a single one of the massive casing blocks. The scale of what they were witnessing was simply beyond any human frame of reference they possessed. These could not be the work of men. They must be the pillars that held up the sky, the homes of the creator gods, or perhaps the graves of the first ones, the giants from the mythical dreamtime before the great flood. They would have approached the site with a mixture of terror and reverence. They would have seen the great water-worn body of the Sphinx and recognized in its erosion a creature that had survived the very flood from their most ancient legends. The silent, empty chambers within the pyramids would have been the passageways to the underworld. The perfect celestial alignments would not be science, but pure magic. The true history of these monuments was utterly lost, erased by the ice and the great forgetting. For these new people, the pyramids were not a legacy to be understood, but a mystery to be worshipped. They had not found the works of their ancestors, but the living heart of a new mythology. They made their camp in the shadow of these sleeping gods, and the civilization that would one day call itself Egypt was born. The new people of the Nile Valley lived in the shadow of a mystery they could not solve. Generation after generation, they gazed up at the perfect, silent mountains of stone and the water-worn face of the great Sphinx. Awe unanswered cannot remain silent. It must find a voice. It must tell itself a story. And so, over the slow centuries, the awe these new people felt was woven into a magnificent and complex tapestry of myth. The mystery of Giza became the genesis of their gods. The structures were too perfect, too vast, to be the work of mortals, so they were attributed to the first gods who shaped the world out of chaos. The monument's unwavering alignment with the heavens was not a feat of ancient science, but a physical manifestation of Mayat, the divine principle of order, truth, and cosmic balance. The Sphinx, which had watched the world drown and re-emerge, became the guardian of the sacred threshold between the world of the living and the land of the gods, the keeper of all secrets. The history they could not know was replaced by a mythology that could explain the impossible. But what if these myths were not pure invention? There is an ancient idea, a way of looking at legends, called euhemerism. It is the theory that the gods of mythology were not originally supernatural beings, but real historical figures. Great kings, brilliant scientists, wise queens, whose lives and deeds were so extraordinary that over the immense gulf of time, their stories were magnified into divinity. Let us look at the Egyptian pantheon through this gentle lens. Could Osiris, the king who was murdered and then reborn to become the lord of the underworld, be the distant, mythologized memory of a real leader who guided his people through the death and rebirth of the world itself? Could Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, mathematics, and writing, be the deified remembrance of a whole class of scientists and scribes from a lost age, the keepers of the sacred knowledge? This pattern, this ghost of a memory of a lost golden age brought to ruin, is not unique to Egypt. In the traditions of ancient Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization between the rivers Tigris and Euphrates, there are the stories of the Apkallu, the 7 sages. These were said to be semi-divine beings who lived in the world before the Great Flood. They possessed a profound wisdom, and after the waters receded, they emerged to find humanity scattered and primitive. It was these 7 sages, the legends say, who taught mankind the arts of civilization anew, the principles of law, the secrets of agriculture, the foundations of architecture. They were the bringers of a lost antediluvian knowledge to a traumatized, forgetful world. Could the legends of the Apkallu and the stories of the Egyptian gods be 2 different cultural interpretations of the same, real, historical event? Could they be the fragmented memories of the actual survivors of our pre-Ice Age civilization, a small number of whom managed to preserve some of their high knowledge and pass it on to the new emerging cultures of the post-Ice Age world? If we hold this thought, even the most enigmatic of Egyptian sacred texts begins to look different. Consider the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells and hymns intended to guide the soul of the deceased through the perils of the underworld. Its true purpose and meaning remain an open-ended mystery for scholars. But what if it is not only a spiritual guide, but also a deeply encoded historical one? What if the chaotic and terrifying journey through the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, is a symbolic retelling of the actual experience of surviving the global cataclysm? The soul's journey past fiery serpents and lakes of fire could be a memory of the sky falling. The treacherous navigation through a dark and disorienting landscape could be the folk memory of a world shattered by floods and earthquakes. And the final goal, the entry into the blissful field of reeds, a perfect, orderly, and fertile paradise. Could this be the enduring, heartbreaking memory of the green world that was lost? The spells in this light become fragments of the lost knowledge needed to survive, to rebuild, to impose order on a world of chaos once more. The myths, then, are the scar tissue of a profound historical trauma, a story so terrible it could only be told as a fable. The myths of the new people were a bridge, an attempt to connect their own emerging world to the impossibly ancient one that had left behind such incomprehensible monuments. By turning the builders into gods, they gave the mystery a name, a story, and a place within their cosmos. But if we, for a moment, accept the premise of our long journey, that these myths are the ghosts of forgotten facts, then we must also accept that our entire understanding of the human story needs to be redrawn. We are forced to look at the vast timeline of our past and read not a story of linear progress, but one of profound and tragic interruption. The story we have always told ourselves is one of a slow, steady upward climb. For nearly 200,000 years, our species, Homo sapiens, existed as small bands of nomadic hunter-gatherers. Then, around 12,000 years ago, a great warming began. The ice retreated, and in this new, stable, and benevolent climate, the geological epoch we call the Holocene, we invented farming. From farming came villages, then cities, then writing, empires, philosophy, science, and eventually, us. Our entire history of civilization is packed into this single, short, warm chapter. We are the children of the Holocene, the first and only technological species to arise on this planet. This is the bedrock of our modern identity. But what if this story is only half told? What if the Holocene is not the beginning of the story, but merely the second act? The thought experiment we have been following invites us to consider a radically different narrative. A story where history is not a straight line, but a cycle. A story where our own civilization is not the first great flowering of human potential, but simply the latest, growing in the fertile soil left behind by a previous world that was almost entirely erased. In this version of the past, we are not a species that is finally achieving greatness. We are a species with amnesia, slowly and painstakingly rediscovering a greatness that was achieved once before and then lost. This idea sheds a strange new light on some of the great puzzles of human prehistory, like the so-called Great Hiatus. This is the open-ended mystery of why anatomically modern humans, with brains identical to our own, seem to have existed for 150,000 years with very little change in their culture or technology before a sudden creative explosion around 50,000 years ago. Was it truly a slow start? Or was this immense period of apparent stagnation not a beginning at all, but a long, painful, and arduous period of recovery? Was it the story of a species knocked back to a near-zero point, scattered into tiny survivor populations, the great knowledge of their ancestors lost, forced to begin the long climb all over again? Even within our own recorded history, we have proof that knowledge is not a simple, upward march. In a Roman-era shipwreck off a Greek island, a remarkable device was found. Now called the Antikythera mechanism, it is an intricate astronomical computer of stunning complexity. Its system of more than 30 interlocking bronze gears could predict the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, and the timing of eclipses, with a precision that would not be seen again in the world for another 1,500 years. The knowledge to build such a device was lost with the fall of the classical world. It is a stark reminder that even a minor dark age can cause a civilization to forget its own highest achievements. Now, imagine a dark age caused not by the collapse of an empire, but but by a global, geological cataclysm, the forgetting would be absolute. If we accept this cyclical view, we are forced to look upon our own time with a new and profound humility. We, who have mapped the human genome and sent probes to the outer planets, see ourselves as the pinnacle of this planet's intelligence. But are we the first to understand the complex motions of the stars? Are we the first to develop a global geography? Are we the first to master the art of building on a scale that can withstand the millennia? Or are we just now, after 12,000 years of climbing, finally approaching a summit that was reached once before? The scars of deep time are not just in the rock of the Sphinx or the layout of the plateau. They are in our myths. They are in the forgotten potential of our own DNA, and they are in the story we tell ourselves about ourselves. The pyramids, in this light, challenge us to remember what we have forgotten, and so we return from our long journey through the frozen past to the present day. We stand once more on the Giza Plateau, under the warm Egyptian sun, but we see it now with different eyes. The story of a lost world, of a great winter, and a profound amnesia now hangs in the air, a silent question. Mark beside these familiar monuments, we are left to look upon the pyramids not just as a wonder of the ancient world, but as the possible remnants of a forgotten one. Today, the pyramids seem a part of the landscape, their color the same as the sand that surrounds them, their texture rough and weathered by the ages. But this is not how they were born. We must imagine them in their original state, covered in a brilliant skin of highly polished, white casing stones, quarried from Tura across the Nile. In their youth, the pyramids would not have been sand-colored, but would have gleamed a dazzling, perfect white, reflecting the sun's light like a beacon. They were not designed to be earthy and weathered, but to be otherworldly, pristine, and geometric, as if they had just descended from the sky. They were jewels upon the landscape, their smooth, shining faces a testament to a people who valued a flawless, celestial perfection. And just as their original appearance is now a memory, their interior secrets remain deeply guarded. For all our centuries of study, for all the passages and chambers we have mapped, the pyramids remain a mystery. In recent years, scientists with the Scan Pyramids project have begun to peer inside the stone using a technology that feels almost as magical as the monuments themselves, cosmic ray muon tomography. By tracking these tiny harmless particles as they pass through the pyramid from the atmosphere, they can detect voids and chambers hidden within the solid masonry. In much the same way an X-ray reveals the bones within a body, and this new way of seeing has revealed that the pyramids have not yet told us all their secrets. Deep within the Great Pyramid, they have found a massive, previously unknown void, as long as the Grand Gallery itself. The purpose of this hidden chamber remains one of the great unanswered questions of Giza. The pyramid, it seems, is not yet finished speaking to us. Ultimately, to build such a thing is to make a stand against the greatest force in the universe, not gravity, but time. The fundamental law of our cosmos is entropy, the inescapable principle that everything trends towards disorder. Order requires energy. Chaos is the default state. Stars burn out, mountains erode, memories fade. This is the irreversible arrow of time. And yet, the pyramids stand. They are perhaps the most audacious, the most magnificent, and the most successful attempt by human beings to defy this universal law. They are a statement made in millions of tons of stone, an assertion that order, precision, and memory can be made to endure. And so we are left with two stories. One is the story of a brilliant Bronze Age civilization, the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom, who in a few short generations marshaled their society to build eternal tombs for their kings. It is a magnificent story, and it may well be the true one. But there is another story, the one we have followed tonight, a story that is whispered by the water-weathered stone of the Sphinx, by the global echo of flood myths, by the strange anomalies of a forgotten science. It is the story of a great civilization of the Ice Age, a people who mapped the stars and the globe, who were shattered by a global cataclysm and whose memory was almost entirely erased. In this story, the pyramids are not tombs for kings we know, but memorials to a humanity we have forgotten. They are the silent sentinels on the sand, the last and greatest testament of a lost chapter of the human soul. Our journey through deep time and deep questions is now coming to a close. The great stones of Giza will keep their watch, as they have for ages beyond our counting, long after our quiet words have faded into the stillness of the night. The mysteries we have explored do not ask for an immediate answer. They ask only for a moment of wonder, a quiet space in the mind where the story we tell ourselves about the world can become a little larger, a little deeper. The universe is ancient, and the human story may be far more grand and more tragic than we have ever known. But for now, it is time to let these questions rest. It is time to let the great weight of the millennia settle, and to allow your own mind to drift on the slow, gentle current of time, back to the simple, quiet peace of the present moment. The great sentinels will still be there in the morning. What if we are a species with amnesia, living in the echo of a forgotten song? What if... End of script. Sweet dreams.